Namaste and Jai Swaminarayan. Welcome to this week's episode of Timeless Hindu Wisdom. This is a special web series delivered by the Swamis of BAPS Swaminarayan Sanstha. It has been initiated to inspire us during these challenging times with the universal wisdom of ancient Hindu scriptures, presented in a contemporary, bite-sized format. Vivekjivandas Swami was brought up and educated in London, UK. After studying biochemistry at Chelsea College of Science and Technology, now a part of King's College London, he was ordained as a sadhu by His Holiness Pramukh Swami Maharaj in 1976. Thereafter, he studied Eastern and Western philosophy and Indian classical vocal music in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. For the past 3 decades, he has been writing and editing BAPS's bi-monthly spiritual magazine in English, Swaminarayan Bliss. He has also translated and authored several books in English, including the popularly acclaimed 2-part Hinduism, an Introduction. Vivekjivandas Swami is a versatile speaker addressing high school and university students, as well as professionals and young adults on a regular basis in India. His insightful and motivational talks relate to life issues, Hindu values, and spiritual teachings. So without further ado, I now hand it over to Vivekjivandas Swami.
Think differently. In our fast-paced world, we tend to do things related to our daily life in a run-of-the-mill way. As a result, whatever that we do, whether it is related to our studies, life or work, we tend to do it in a stereotyped or robotic manner. Hence, whatever that we do, it becomes drudgery or routine. We must try to think that there are better, interesting, easy ways of doing things successfully. There are ways of doing things, routine things, in a joyful and happy manner. And that is why we have to bring ourselves out from the routine rut of daily life. It is essential to think differently in the small things and the big things that we do in life. A primary class of boys in a German school was going on. The boys were rowdy and unruly. As a result, the teacher decided to punish them. The teacher told all the boys to add up the numbers 1 to 100. All the boys settled down in doing the task. They started scribbling on a piece of paper. Each student started scribbling on a piece of paper, trying to add up 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 4 is 10. They had to add up the numbers 1 to 100. It so happened that in that class there was a boy who felt that there must be an easier way of adding the numbers 1 to 100. He looked out of the window, trying to think as to what that easy way could be. A thought struck to him, and he wrote down the answer. At the end of the task, all the students were told to hand in or to declare their answers. All of them were wrong except that single boy who was thinking about an easier way of doing the task. When the teacher asked that single boy, the boy said the answer is 5,050. The teacher was amazed and surprised as to how he arrived at the right answer. The boy explained that first of all I felt that there must be an easier way of doing the task. So what I did was, I added up the extreme numbers. In other words, 1 plus 100 is equal to 101. 2 plus 99 is equal to 101. 3 plus 98 is equal to 101. The boy replied that there were 101 50 times. So 101 multiplied by 50 is equal to 5050. The boy was right. His answer was correct. He had found an easier way of doing the mathematical task. The teacher felt that the boy was an extraordinary student. Special tutoring classes were given to that boy, and that boy grew up to be one of the greatest mathematicians of the early 20th century. His name was Carl Friedrich Gauss of Germany. Thinking differently. Think differently. By thinking differently, we can definitely make our tasks easier and more successful. Another example of thinking differently, an eloquent example, which Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, the former President of India and the Missile Man of India, a great scientist, a people's president. He shares a wonderful incident from his life when he was the project director of the SLV indigenous program in India. The SLV program meant that Space Launch Vehicle. This was an indigenous project whereby India was producing its own space launch vehicle to put satellites rotating around the Earth. Abdul Kalam was a project manager in the years 1978. His team of scientists had been working hard for several years. His superior was Mr. Satish Dhawan. In the year 1979, the SLV program, the countdown for the SLV program began at the Sriharikota Center in the southern part of India. The space launch vehicle took off. The first stage was successful, but there was a glitch in the second stage and the entire space launch vehicle crashed into the ocean. It was an abysmal failure. Abdul Kalam was dejected. He was depressed. After years of hard work, failure was very difficult to digest. Abdul Kalam was in no mood to address the press and media persons who were waiting for answers as to why the project had failed. Abdul Kalam's superior, Professor Satish Dhawan, he gauged the fact that Abdul Kalam was in no mood to address the media persons. So as his superior, Professor Satish Dhawan, he tapped Dr. Abdul Kalam on his shoulders and he said, "Don't worry, I will go and address the press." Professor Satish Dhawan addressed the press. He gave answers as to why the failure had occurred. In the following year, in the year 1980, obviously, since the past 1 year, Abdul Kalam and his team, they rectified whatever errors that had occurred. And in the year 1980, 1 year later, the SLV program was again going through its countdown. And the Rohini satellite was stationed around the Earth. The project was a success. At that time, Professor Satish Dhawan told Abdul Kalam that you go and address the press. Abdul Kalam writes that Professor Satish Dhawan showed him what true leadership is all about. A true leader, he shoulders failures upon his own self, and he shares success with all his colleagues. He does not alone take the credit of success upon himself. Abdul Kalam writes that it was a new perspective in life, a new lesson in life, a different way of thinking about life that he was able to imbibe and be inspired in his own life. Think differently. It is important to think differently, especially in times of failure, especially in times of insult, especially in difficult times. Thinking differently enables an individual to muster up patience, to give him tolerance and patience in life. Thinking differently is important. There is a book called Anatomy of an Illness, written by Norman Cousins. Norman Cousins was a motivational speaker in America. He was also the editor of the Saturday Review Daily in New York. Norman Cousins writes in his book Anatomy of an Illness that in 1964 he experienced a debilitating disease, an autoimmune disease, which more or less paralyzed his entire body. All his muscles and connective tissues were more or less paralyzed. As part of his treatment, he was given anti-inflammatory drugs and painkillers, and sedatives and vitamin C intravenous injections. There was no improvement. In fact, the anti-inflammatory drugs and painkillers were causing side effects and allergies. So, Norman Cousins, he asked his doctor who was treating him, what are my chances of being cured from this disease? The doctor said 1 in 500. This meant that more or less it was an incurable disease. But Norman Cousins decided that he wanted to cure himself. He wanted to get better. First of all, he started to think as to what was responsible for the autoimmune disease that he was suffering from. On backtracking, he realized the stress of preparing his speeches, the stress of traveling to places where he would have to deliver the speeches, working with bureaucracy and working with incompetent people. These were some of the reasons behind the stress that he had experienced and the stress that had triggered off the autoimmune disease. Norman Cousins decided that he wanted to cure himself. So he asked the doctor that he wanted to more or less be relieved from the anti-inflammatory drugs and the painkillers. And he told the doctor that he should only administer to him vitamin C intravenously. Then Norman Cousins thought of creating, of developing positive emotions, emotions like love, hope, faith, and laughter. Norman Cousins realized that he had hope, he had faith in God. He was also very much at ease with himself, faith, love, hope, and laughter. He had a lot of hope as well. So he decided that the only thing that was remaining was laughter. Some of his friends delivered to him some comedy classics, the Marx Brothers, and other comedy films. Each day, Norman Cousins would have a 10-minute dose of laughter. He would see 10-minute clips of those comedy films. By seeing those comedy films, Norman Cousins would laugh. He would describe as belly laughter, or he had described it as belly laughter. He would laugh so intensively for 10 minutes that after 10 minutes of laughter, he would be lulled into a pain-free sleep for 2 hours. When the anesthetic effect of the dose of laughter wore off, he would again expose himself to 10 minutes of comedy film, and he would laugh again. In this way, 7 days later, it so happened that there was very little change, but he felt a little better. After 7 days, he was off the remaining drugs that he was given as part of his treatment. On the 8th day, Norman Cousins was able to just move his thumb. He was not able to move any part of his body. He continued with his treatment of laughter and vitamin C injections, and he did recover. Several months later, he was able to get up, and several years later, he got back to his normal routine. The reason why Norman Cousins came out of his difficult and more or less incurable disease was because of positive emotions. Love, hope, laughter, and faith. Thinking differently may definitely or will definitely help an individual come out of difficult situations, or it may provide him with the tolerance to bear the physical pains and difficulties that a person may be going through. Thinking differently definitely bails us out, or more or less alleviates the situation to some extent. Thinking differently in all aspects of life definitely improves the quality of life, the quality of action, the quality of results that we expect in life. In the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, a glowing example of thinking differently is provided by the sermons of Bhagavan Sri Krishna to his friend Arjun. Arjun was a great fighter. He was a great warrior. It has been said in the Bhagavad Gita that he was a Maharathi. He was an extraordinary warrior. He was ambidextrous. He could shoot arrows equally well and hit the target if he operated his bow and arrow with his right hand or with his left hand. He was equally successful. This was the caliber that Arjun possessed in terms of fighting, in terms of combat. Arjun tells Krishna, who was the driver of his chariot. Arjun tells Sri Krishna that please take my chariot in the middle of the battleground. I would like to see the opponents, the Kauravas, my cousin brothers and my gurus who are going to fight against me. Bhagavan Sri Krishna, he steers the chariot and he stops before the mighty army of the Kauravas. On looking at his cousin brothers and his gurus and his friends, suddenly Arjun collapses. He starts sweating. He starts throbbing with fear. He puts his bow on the ground, or more or less his bow slips out of his hand. His throat is dry. Arjun tells Sri Krishna that I do not want to fight. Krishna was very much surprised. He was shocked because moments later Arjun was ready to fight the great war, the Mahabharata war. And why this sudden change? Why this sudden collapse? Krishna was God. He was quick to perceive the situation that Arjun was in. And Krishna, he imparts to him the divine message of the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavan Sri Krishna tells Arjun that you are not the fighter. You are merely an instrument. You are not the body. You are the Atma. You are merely an instrument. All your cousin brothers, the opponents who are there before you, they are all dead. They are already dead. You are the soul. Do not believe that you are the doer. Do not believe that you are the body. Bhagavan Sri Krishna has a very wonderful dialogue with Arjun. Arjun also argues with Bhagavan Sri Krishna. 700 shlokas of the Bhagavad Gita. At the end of that epic sermon, Arjun was resuscitated. He was revived, and he gets ready to fight a war of good against evil, a war of dharma against adharma. And Arjun and the Pandavas, they win the battle. The reason behind this was, it was Sri Krishna who gave him a different attitude. He gave him a different perspective to life. And because of that different perspective to life, Arjun got ready to do his duty. Doing one's duty, no matter how difficult or challenging it may be, requires thinking differently. Thinking differently definitely provides the impetus, the inspiration, the courage, the patience to surge forward amidst the obstacles and challenges in life. Once Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in the town of Nadiyad in Gujarat. Two youths who had won in the local election, they were elected as leaders of that particular town, the town of Nadiyad. They were happy, they were exultant about the fact that they had won the elections. They came to Pramukh Swami Maharaj, who happened to be in Nadiyad at that time, to seek his blessings. Pramukh Swamiji blessed those two youths, and Pramukh Swamiji reminded them. Swamiji said, never forget to serve the people. Because the people have elected you, never ever forget that you have been elected to serve the citizens, the people of Nadiyad. Secondly, you are youths. So never ever do things in a hurry. Do things calmly and do your duty patiently. Two golden advices, two different ways of thinking that Pramukh Swami Maharaj inspired in those youths. Life in many ways requires us to think differently. Sometimes we need to think several notches higher. To extricate ourselves from a problem, if you try to extricate that problem from the level of that problem, then you will never be able to free or unshackle yourself from that problem. If you try to extricate or rather solve that problem from a lower level, then you are going to create more problems. The individual has to rise over those problems. He has to transcend those problems and think differently in order to resolve the issue at hand. His Holiness Mahant Swami Maharaj, the present spiritual master of the BAPS, was presiding over a grand celebration of His Holiness Pramukh Swami Maharaj in the year 2018 in Rajkot. The celebration site obviously comprised of a huge area of land. The land was donated by several farmers, and because of their donation for a specific period, the celebration venue was held on that particular area, on that particular site. It so happened that there were some farmers who did not donate their piece of land for the celebration site. As a result, the celebration site had to be rearranged in such a way whereby the pieces of land that had not been donated to us would more or less not interfere with the celebration itself. When Mahant Swami Maharaj came to know that there were some farmers who had not donated their piece of land for the celebration, Mahant Swamiji replied, the lead volunteer, that have you invited those farmers who did not contribute their land for the celebration? The lead volunteer replied, no. Mahant Swamiji said that we should invite them. Invite them for the celebration. Show them the various exhibitions and various programs that are being held on the celebration site. And at the end of it, serve them lunch as well. Those farmers were invited. They saw the celebration site, the various exhibitions and various presentations. They were very much impressed. And after having lunch, they were extremely appreciative for having been guided and been shown around the entire celebration. They appreciated the fact that they were invited in spite of not donating their piece of land. Those farmers, they regretted the fact that they did not donate their piece of land for such a wonderful celebration, for a celebration that would be contributing in many ways for the welfare and elevation of society. When the lead volunteer gave the news that the farmers who had not donated their land were happy on seeing the celebration and its various presentations, at that time, Mahant Swamiji said that we thank them for coming. The lead volunteer said that, Swamiji, why are you saying thank you to them? Swamiji said that I am thanking them because they accepted our invitation to come and see the celebration site. Thinking differently is very important. When somebody is against us, when somebody does not help us, what type of reactions, what type of thoughts do we have? How do we behave? We become antagonistic towards that individual or towards that person. Thinking differently is very, very important to bring people together. So, to conclude, we live in a fast-paced world, and we do things in a stereotyped or run-of-the-mill manner, and that is why we miss the joys, the zest, the happiness, the satisfaction in life. But when we try to do things, whatever they may be, in a different manner, in a higher manner, then we will be able to experience the joys and the bliss and the satisfaction that we all seek for in life. What are some of the things that we should think differently about? Firstly, don't try to congest your life with so many things in a single day. Don't clutter your mind. Don't clutter your responsibilities. Try to do things or try to manage things according to your capacities and the limitations of time and resources. Secondly, one should also think positively, especially in difficult situations, in contrasting situations. Thirdly, it is important to try to help others, serve others. It is also important not to be I-centric, but to be other-centric. It is necessary that we should try to cultivate to solve situations rather than creating situations. And lastly, faith in God, moral values in life. These are also very important aspects which enable us to experience success, joy, and satisfaction. The more we consolidate our faith in God, the more we consolidate our faith in good people, the more we consolidate our faith and trust in the scriptures, the better we are able to think differently, thinking differently for progress, for satisfaction, for joy. Thinking differently. Think differently.